Joining. You're after. This is fantastic. Normally you get at a bookshop, right? You're not on mute.
Lovely. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome to this evening's Avid Reader Zoom session. We have Hayley Katzen in conversation with Lee Kofman for the launch of Hayley's memoir, Untethered. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am currently broadcasting from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before I hand over to the first of our speakers this evening, I'd just like to go over some of the information that I sent to you in the email with the link to tonight's event. So first of all, as we're a very big group this evening, which is wonderful, we just need to reduce the potential for any disruption and noises. So you've all automatically been placed on mute and you'll remain so throughout the event. But at the end, don't worry, I'll unmute you all so that you can say thank you and give a round of applause to our speakers tonight. Later in the evening, we'll be having a Q&A session. So if you have questions for Hayley, then please type them in the chat box and send them to me, ideally before 7 p.m, but get them in as and when they come. Your messages will all be sent directly to me, and then I'll read them out as soon as I'm prompted to do so by Lee. So if you drop out of this session for any reason, you can use the same link that you used to join this time in order to rejoin, and I'll admit you as quickly as possible. The same applies for any of our speakers tonight. Of course, if somebody drops out due to a loss of connection, we'll take a short pause, allow them to rejoin and resume the conversation as soon as we can. So I would now like to introduce Hayley Katzen. Hayley migrated from South Africa to Australia in 1989. In Sydney, she graduated with an LLB and worked in public law and law reform before making a sea change to the north coast of New South Wales to work as a law lecturer and researcher. Passionate about the power of stories, she quit law to study acting, performed in local plays, and wrote and produced a play about asylum seekers. In 2005, Hayley moved to her girlfriend's cattle farm in the Australian bush, and it was here she practiced the crafts of short story and essay writing and completed an MFA in creative writing. Her writing has won competitions, been read on ABC Radio and Queer Stories, and been published in Australian, American, and Asian journals and anthologies, including Australian Book Review, Griffith Review, Southerly, Fourth Genre, and Kenyon Review. Untethered is her debut memoir. In conversation with Hayley tonight is Lee Kofman. Lee is the author of 5 books, including creative nonfiction works Imperfect, 2019, and The Dangerous Bride, 2014. She is editor of the 2019 anthology Split and co-editor of the 2016 anthology Rebellious Daughters, both published by Ventura Press. Her short works have been widely published in Australia, UK, Scotland, Israel, Canada, and the US, including in Best Australian Stories, Best Australian Essays, Griffith Review, Malahat Review, and Creative Nonfiction. Her blog was a finalist for Best Australian Blogs 2014. Lee has been mentoring writers and teaching creative writing courses for more than a decade. So before I hand you over to Lee and Hayley, I would also like to introduce Jane Curry, who is Hayley's publisher and Lee's publisher, and will be saying a few words ahead of the conversation. So with an international publishing career spanning over 25 years, Jane brings an immense wealth of experience, commercial savvy, and industry connections to Impact Press. Jane has been managing director of Weldon Publishing and Macquarie Dictionary, and she published her own list at Pan Macmillan. Jane was also on the board of the Australian Publishers Association and headed the Independent Publishers Committee. She is an elected board member of the Copyright Agency and serves as head of audit and finance. She is also an AFR Westpac 100 Women of Influence. So I would now like to hand you over to Jane, who will be saying a few words before we go to the in conversation. So thanks, Jane.
Thank you. It's very funny hearing all of that when I'm sitting in my living room surrounded by non-professional accoutrements. So it's wonderful to be here, principally because I am so thrilled to be publishing Hayley's memoir, which I have to hold up, the first sighting of the evening, Untethered. And one of the reasons we're here tonight is Lee Kofman, which is why it's so special that we're all together, because Lee found Hayley for me to publish Split. And if there's a theme running through all of this, it's the fact that the three of us, none of us were born in this country. and we've all made our home in this country by coming from somewhere else. Hayley from South Africa, and Lee, Russia via Israel, and me from England. So I know we've got people coming tonight from all over the world, and I just think how wonderful it is that through the pandemic under which we're living, this book launch has become truly international. And so I suppose to say that it's a book about belonging, and it's a book about making home in Australia, how wonderful in a way that all of us are here on Zoom. The two people in conversation born from across the seas, as the national anthem says. And I'm very proud to be the publisher to both of you. So that's my introduction. Hayley, we're delighted you've chosen Ventura Press for your debut memoir. And I'm going to hand over to you both before I start crying. So here you are, you have the floor, you have the Zoom.
This is so well said, Jane. Thank you so much. We are very lucky, both Hayley and I, to have you as our midwife. And I feel absolutely honored, absolutely delighted that I can be here to launch Hayley's wonderful, wonderful book. How many lives can one person live? What is home, and how do we find one? Untethered, this wonderfully strange and complex exploration of the wonderfully strange and complex life of my friend Hayley, is a seeker's story. It is a story of movement, of restlessness, mostly creative and productive restlessness, but often a maddening one too. It is a mercurial, vivid exploration of the notion of belonging, told mostly from a place of stillness, a place of ancient trees and slowly moving cattle. It is a book of a brilliant, desirous brain in full drive, trying to slow down, at least for a little while. In short, it is the kind of book that anyone who has ever wrestled with dissatisfaction, anyone who has tried to figure out how to live a better life, should read. Untethered, the way I read it, is not only a story of double migration, first to a faraway country, and secondly, to a faraway outback, but it is also an exploration of the burden of multiple identities. The burden that is a blessing too, enriching us, but a burden nevertheless. To be a queer South African, Australian, Jewish, lawyer and academic, turned actor, turned writer plus farmer is not for the faint-hearted. Such a feat requires a hero, or a heroine in our case. Indeed, there are epic undertones in this book. Untethered often reads like Odyssey in reverse, where the protagonist repeatedly tries to leave her bushy Ithaca, only to always come back, and back to her patient, loving Penelope, or rather Jen, who is here as well, of course. We just can't see her now. Untethered is also one of those thick books to steal from both my and Hayley's favorite author, Robert Dessay. Thick writing, Dessay suggests, reaches out to so many different parts of your thinking and your life. Indeed, as I read this book, I kept questioning my own way of living. Why do I live where I live? What is my version of home? Which is exactly what the best memoirists achieve. Their dissecting of their lives primarily serves to prompt their readers to engage in their own soul searching. To add to this, Hayley is the perfect bard of the restlessness and yearnings of the human soul. Her prose is unfailingly intimate and fresh. I particularly found her descriptions of daily life in the bush breathtaking, not only in the detail, but also in the examination of the relationship between external and internal landscapes. Like when Hayley describes the pleasure she takes in her regular walks in the bush, she writes, "I was alive to the changes in light and season, to the summer lemony yellow flower of the cat's claw, to the fireweed anointing the paddocks gold in autumn. I watched spotty gum trunks, a blister to a speckled mottle, like a giraffe's neck or leopard skin, and then to smooth, clean emerald that drew my cheek. The grey gum's transformation was slower. first peeling like a banana skin, then dangling until its weight fell to the ground. How the natural world soothed and nourished. How I love this openness and spaciousness. Before I read Untethered, I thought I knew Hayley well, her charming, smart, full of life and generous self. But like the best of writers, Hayley seems to have reserved the most delectable and idiosyncratic parts of her psyche for her pages. And so having read this book, I have felt richer both as a reader and also as a friend. Now, there's so much more I can say about this really, really wonderful book, but our time is running short and I want to make sure we actually hear from the most important person here, the author herself. So it's with the greatest of pleasures that I'm now declaring this book to be officially launched into the world. Yay, where's the book? Now, I know it's all book launches are very special always, of course, very meaningful to the writers, especially first book launch. But Hayley, I've been thinking, you've been through so much in the last year or so, and it must be quite special for you today, particularly perhaps. I mean, do you want to sort of speak a little bit about this tough time and what it means for you to be here today?
Lee, I'd love to, and thank you so much for all you said, and thank you to you, Jane. I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge that the Wallabal people are the traditional custodians of the land where the farm is based, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present of the Bundjalung Nation. I'd like to also say that this book is not about last year. I think most of the people in the audience know me. So the book's not about ovarian cancer. It's not about drought and bushfire. It's not about the loss of a most beloved friend. The thing that I've really had to learn, and many of you have watched me, is, and it's taken years of tears and sweat and shame to appreciate that it really does take patience and perspective to find the pattern to one's life and craft it into a coherent narrative. That's step one. And then, is that narrative actually worth sharing? And I think what you were referring to, Lee, is exactly it. You know, was I able to come somewhere where my story could, you know, be of use to somebody else and allow you to universalize, you know, is it universal enough? And can people then find themselves in their own stories within that narrative that I've created? And I do, although I'm not going to, I promised I wouldn't say a million thank yous because it would take all night, but I do really want to thank, you know, those of you who've zoomed in from all over the world. I'm deeply grateful to have people from New York, I hope, and Israel and London and South Africa and Spain. And yeah, it's an extraordinary experience to have what Zoom is offering us. Sorry, and I'm so overexcited that I don't know what to do with myself. But what I did want to say in terms of that theme and that coherent narrative, I do really want to thank Nadine Davidoff, who is the editor I went to, who helped me find that theme. I was jumping. I'd written a whole lot of essays and I was jumping between identity, difference, isolation, belonging, home, displacement from migration, all those many issues, and how on earth to find this clear thread on which to hang all those varied issues. All of us have so many issues in our life, and how do we find that one that's going to work? I mean, people like Mary Carr write countless memoirs. I'm not sure I will, but yeah, that was my big challenge, how to find that thread. And so I'm deeply grateful to Nadine for getting me there. Deeply grateful too to my many writing friends who've, you know, provided inspiration and conversation and read my work at times. And particularly to Jessie Blackadder, who first got me writing and texted me this afternoon with reassurance and encouragement. But I also do really want to say thank you to you, Jane, publicly, and also to Zoe Hale and to Sophie Hodge and to Holly Jeffries and to Simone Ford, the copy editor, and to Chris Aioli, the proofreader, and to Deb Parry for the drop-dead gorgeous cover, and to Anna and Nikki from Pitch Projects. It's quite extraordinary to have worked so alone for so many years and then suddenly to become part of this extraordinary team of people bringing a book to the world. So Have I rattled on, Lee? I have.
No, not in the slightest. But I actually want to sort of, sorry, have you finished with the thank you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So I just want to sort of go back a little bit to this idea of searching what is the book about. And as you said before yourself, it is a book about identity as well. And I find it really fascinating in your book, the very sort of interesting intersection that you explore between home and identity. And I read a little bit your book also, not so much a search for identity as a kind of refining of identity, because you have so many of them. It's sort of like working out where do you exactly fit in. So I wonder if you would like to talk a little bit about that, about this intersection between the search for home and identity.
I think that's why I managed to find an end to the book, because I think it was the amalgamation and the integration of those two factors, which is really what helped me find the end to the book, because it is only because of a home inside myself that I feel like I can be okay anywhere in the world now. So I think that sense of duality and multidimensionality, which some of us have, migrants have it in a particular way, but I think anyone who moves place in some way has it. I think that multidimensionality and duality is what I grappled with so much. You know, who are we? You know, we can affix a whole lot of labels to ourselves, but it can get very confusing. And it can make that uncertainty about where we fit and where we belong a really challenging space for some of us. So for me, I think I kept wondering, you know, where should I be? How did I wind up living here with Jen? I mean, those of you who know me know it was really a place I never dreamed I would come and live. And then I chose to, and it's all been my choice. And then I've struggled so much for so many years with it. And I think where I've got to is that place that home is inside us, and I am able to be anywhere now. You know, I had those 7 wonderful months house sitting in Melbourne a few years ago where I really thought I would never return to the farm, and I was much more probably in my habitat than a rural habitat. But I did come back, and I'm delighted to have come back and to be doing this life with Jen, and to be able to be myself here now is probably the greatest thing that's happened to me in my life, is that I feel I can be anywhere, and that the question isn't where is home, it's am I here now. And I think, you know, it's interestingly your question before about it having been a tough year. So I'm interested in the lens with which we look at things. You know, I obviously my last year has given me an awareness of the precariousness of life, and also the capacity for renewal and recovery as well, both of those things juxtaposed. So it's so interesting to then look with the lens that I have now at the work that I've created, that, you know, the book ends in 2017. But the thing is, it's still me, and it's that multidimensional self. And I will go everywhere with myself. You know, Jen is absolutely the love of my life. And many people have read this purely as a love story, that we, you know, home is where the heart is. We find home with that love. And absolutely, I found home with Jen. But the most important home is still with me, inside me. That's the heart. And so you're absolutely right. The home, the significant home, is the self for me.
This is really interesting because on one hand, of course, I mean, I really enjoy this sort of idea of home being a mobile kind of entity that comes and goes with us to places. But on the other hand, your book is really complicates this idea too, because you show us how places can also mold us. And I guess even when you leave the place, it kind of goes with you. And that brings me back to this idea. I mean, you were mentioning bushfires. The reason bushfires, it was, which is your book is not about, but it was really poignant to read your book in light of what has happened this year earlier, because you live in a really vulnerable place, a very precarious place. And I just wonder, you've been through quite a few losses, which you describe in the book so intelligently and interestingly. And I just wonder, do you feel that living in such a precarious place, so affected by fire, has shaped you internally somehow as well?
I think certainly to live in an area where you don't have access to the kind of safeties that everybody assumes exist, it certainly impacts how one experiences community. It is the most wonderful thing about living in the bush, is how neighbours take care of each other in that physical way. You know, a bushfire here, and if somebody can come and help, they will. Often you're on your own, as we were in the last fire, but, you know, where people can, they'll help. But in terms of that, you know, physical vulnerability, I think that's absolutely been my challenge here, because I haven't felt competent in the landscape either. So I have felt this incredible lack of independence. You know, I'm so dependent on Jen for all sorts of jobs that I can't do myself. And this is a very do-it-yourself place. So I think that's really humbled me. I think that precariousness and vulnerability in the landscape, as well as the incredible awareness of my limitations, has humbled and shaped me in perhaps in another way too. Yeah.
Speaking of the importance of community, especially in a place like where you ended up spending your last years, so you landed in this sort of place full of people who probably were not part of your daily life before, farmers, and, as you sort of put it, alternative lifestylers. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of finding yourself in this sort of community?
I think I didn't really know how to be myself in this community, which comes back again to that need to, you know, find home inside oneself. I kept thinking I needed to fit in more. And, you know, I so wanted to be able to be good at doing things in the cattle yards and to help Jen on the farm. I so wanted to be as fit as all the other firefighters. I wanted to have the language of the area. And, you know, that's not just referring to my neighbours, the Fletchers, who have a particular lingo. But I wanted to
talk about them later.
I wanted to be able to pull my weight and, you know, speak the language. I think it's, you know, a manual language is a different language from a kind of intellectual and academic language. So I thought that what I needed in order to live here and be part of this community was to speak those languages with my words and my body. But, you know, that has actually been the learning. And, you know, my lovely fire brigade mate Paul said to me one day, Hayley, we can't all write stories, you know, we all do our own thing. And it's taken me a hell of a long time to learn that. And I do think that that's probably the art of belonging, is knowing how to be oneself wherever one is and not thinking that one needs to fit into some amorphous them and us, because I don't think they really exist.
And yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Fletchers before. I mean, this is one of the really sort of moving stories in your book, is those that unlikely friendship that you and Jen formed with these three really interesting characters. So three bachelor brothers living on their own and creating their own language even, kind of. Could you maybe tell a little bit the story of those men and what they meant to you?
Well, I obviously came into Jen's story with them when she had a very established friendship with the one brother, particularly Jack, who I write a lot about. And Jack was a wonderful man. And now, you know, Jack's died, Norman's died, Bruce has died. We've been through a lot of Catholic church funerals and a lot of sadness. And now there's just Frankie, who's 83 and who's a really significant part of this community, and in a way is cared for by this community as a whole. And we all want him to just stay exactly where he is, collecting his eggs and being in his house. And I think what's so interesting to me about that relationship is, you know, Frankie doesn't read or write. And here I am completely obsessed with words and ideas. And I think he kind of thinks I'm a bit nuts. He doesn't get me completely, but we have quite a nice chat, and we walked down to collect the eggs the other day together, and I've been doing some business for him with his insurance claim, and we have this sort of relationship. He trusts me, and he certainly trusts Jen. I mean, I think his relationship with Jen is extraordinary. But he's also been a great teacher for me. And I think this has been one of the beauties of being forced really into a life where I've had to give more time to people who I might not have had the opportunity to before. And, you know, Frankie's content. And I've never really understood or known how to have contentment. I might be a little bit better at it now, but he's really happy just with his, you know, Friday trip to town, to casino, an hour and a bit away, and going to the bottle shop and the supermarket and the rural supplier, and then coming home and cooking the barbecue for Friday night haul, and taking everybody's garbage to the tip, and picking up his eggs and looking after his chooks. He's happy. And I think that's just been an extraordinary education for me.
Amazing. Now, we talked about you sort of not fitting in a way because you are a writer, or you mentioned now going to Catholic funerals. What was it like for you to, at least at first when you arrived there, being also, I suspect, the only Jew there in the bush?
Yeah, well, it's pretty interesting. I mean, we've had a couple of anti-Semitic moments. Fortunately, the person who really managed one has long left. We used to call him the poodle man. He farmed poodles in the middle of the bush, and that was really awkward. You know, one day Jen and I let him just dig himself in deeper and deeper until I said to him, actually, I'm Jewish. So that was weird and strong. Mostly I feel like most of the people here probably haven't known Jews before. So I find that interesting. I'll sometimes make a reference on, you know, Friday night is hall night, every second Friday night, and that's Shabbat. And I'll sometimes say to Jen, you know, it's quite hilarious. Here we are, my current version of Shabbat. So I think that was one of the things that I loved about my 7 months in Melbourne. It was that sense of being able to connect with that aspect of myself again. You know, it's that multidimensional self, really, that I've had few opportunities. I'm grateful for my few Jewish friends that I do have. But certainly my Australian life has been vastly different from my South African life, which had a very, even though I was never schooled at Jewish day schools, we had a very secular but established Jewish community. So life has been very different. And, you know, festivals will slip by unless my cousin Jeff kind of reminds me that something's coming. But, you know, I like to light the candles on a Friday night. And I suppose I've made some of those traditions my own now. And this beautiful, happy family that I grew up loving used to have this thing on Shabbat when I was with them where we'd light the candles and we'd say, good Shabbos, have a good week. And whoever's here on a Friday night with us at home will do that. So, you know, I feel like in a way I've found my own way to absorb that dimension of myself and integrate it into this life.
And I mean, I can keep unpacking more and more identities that you have in your book. So I want to touch on one more because, again, it's such a rich as 20 minutes of, you know, conversation don't do justice to your book. But I love how you write about activism, which is, from the book at least, looks like a very significant dimension of your life. And yet you write so openly and with humor about this as well as deep seriousness. And I love how you show that as much as you sort of are passionate about making change, you also sometimes have your limits. And I think this is something that everybody who would call themselves activists will experience, but not necessarily talk about it. So I'm really interested to hear about you a bit more about your relationship with this side of your life.
I've had so many different, activism has always been incredibly important to me and guided and steered me. And I think it's, you know, in the days when I was doing law and, you know, my passion for social justice, my passion for freedom and respect of people is just the governing passion of my life, really. And I think that was really clear for me in South Africa. It was really clear for me in terms when I came to Australia and got involved in lesbian, gay, queer rights and law. It was burning, it was strong. And so too when I did a lot of research into domestic violence. So too in terms of asylum seekers when I wrote the play. The activism of the last number of years has largely been around environment. And that's been really interesting for me because I didn't feel the same clarity in terms of what I was willing to do when it came to that. You know, I wasn't sure I wanted to get arrested. I've taken risks in other parts of my life where I think I was afraid. I've always been afraid, but more willing to do those things. Whereas with the environmental activism, I had this uncertainty, and I kept wondering if some of it was that perhaps, it's the migrant issue that I don't kind of know. I'm, diaspora Jews. My grandparents went from Lithuania to South Africa. Then I come here. This sort of shallow roots, not quite knowing country in my bones or something. I could, get involved in the environmental activism when I saw it as a human right, and I do strongly see it that way. But I had this, this uncertainty about how to do it. But part of that too was, what was my role in that activism? In all my other activism, there's been, I've worked in law, and a lot of that was, I was using my skills. I had a job, I had something I could do. In South Africa, I worked for a volunteer student organization, and, we delivered welfare during forced removal. So we were crisis workers or running education schemes. There was a job. When it came to the environmental activism, I found the blockade experience really challenging, because what was I doing? I've always had this thing about, the work, the home is in the work. And, I think for us as Jews, sometimes it's talked about, is home in the text, it's in the work, in the reading, in the questioning. And I feel like that's where I needed to go with the activism. The home was in that questioning and examination and thinking and writing, but I didn't know how to shape it or what to do with it. And especially when it's urgent, you can't go into the kind of, personal is political thinking that I've gone into in the book. So, that is I think I'm ambivalent and doubtful about lots, Lee. I'm self-doubting as a personality. And I don't really want to be dogmatic about things if I can help it. I've been very passionate about things, and I can't pretend I'm not. But yeah, it's how to keep questioning things. I think that's a crucial part of who I am. And it's what my purpose in life seems to be. It's to try and make sense of things. It's really what I want to do.
And I wonder, and look, it is something I really, really admire about your work, and not just in this memoir, but in your shorter pieces as well, how you really can hold ambivalence and complexity and uncertainty in your writing. Now, as probably a lot of people in the audience know, before Hayley wrote this memoir, she already had a name as an accomplished essayist. You won quite a few awards and had lots of wonderful publications. Is that why you're sort of so drawn to this genre of creative nonfiction with all its subgenres like memoir and essays? Is that because it allows you sort of to more express your doubt or question, or are there any other reasons why you love this particular genre?
I think that's possibly why subconsciously I like it. I certainly have had a big journey to get to that place. And, with law, I was conscious how there was no I ever in any of my work. In my domestic violence report, there was not a single I. And when that point in my life came and I was burnt out and I stopped, I knew I needed to find another way to go. I thought at that point I wanted to walk a mile in another's shoes and find a way to change the world, as I naively thought I could, through acting. If I could embody character, then I could change hearts and minds. And then I thought, okay, if I can write theatre, I can change hearts and minds. And then I thought, no, that's too challenging for me. I get too anxious. Let's try writing short stories. And, I kept thinking it was about stepping into someone else's shoes. And where I eventually got to with a novel that's sitting in the back shed is realizing that the fiction was a facade for so much in me, and I really needed to work out what it was in me that I was trying to make sense of. And so the writing, I think the nonfiction writing has been that ever since I fell in love with the essay in 2012, is just to try and make sense of life and living it. I'm interested in, how do we all live? That internal landscape, what do we bring to the world? How do we walk through it?
And speaking about those sort of questions and trying to understand the world in yourself through your work, I wonder if by writing this book, have you felt that you understood something better about life you own, or in general, have you sort of had any, epiphany is probably a corny word, but have you had some kind of interesting insight that you came into through writing the book?
I think because there's been this genesis from a whole lot of essays that were a whole diverse range, and then coming to putting it together in the memoir. Certainly, as I was working that, I got clearer about this notion of home inside oneself. So that's absolutely come with this writing. There was something I wanted to say in answer to your question, I've just forgotten it. But I think the other thing is Hilary Mantel has this exquisite phrase in her memoir, Giving Up the Ghost, where she talks about how writing, I'm just going to read it to you. For a long time, I felt as if someone else was writing my life. The book of me was being written by other people. I began this writing in an attempt to seize the copyright in myself. And I found that, I read that back in 2012-13, when I was still wondering whether to write oneself was, too self-indulgent. And I found that statement. And I think that's what has really interested me in this process, is I feel that my kind of process has led me to seize the copyright in myself. The same way that I felt like I found home in myself, so too through the writing did I seize that copyright in myself and come to own who I am more clearly. And I think the writing has been the medium through which I've done that. So, I think for me over these years, art and life have been quite synonymous. I've been living on the farm and writing, either helping Jen or writing, and a hell of a lot of isolated alone time, which I think many people now realize, leads to all sorts of thought and reflection and contemplation. And so, with those two so synonymous, that's where it's all taken me. I didn't set out to write a memoir about moving to the country. That's not where this began. My lovely friend Harriet sent me this book many years ago called Love in the Age of Drought, which was by Fiona Higgins. And I remember reading this book and thinking, oh gosh, would I ever write a book like that about my move to live in the country in the age of drought and bushfire? And I thought, no way, because it's not been about that for me. It's not been about telling that story. It's been about making sense of how to live in a way that feels coherent to myself.
That's beautiful. I've got, Hayley, I've got plenty more questions to ask you, but I can't be selfish. And it's my time now, unfortunately for me, not for anybody else, to hand over to Emma to facilitate the Q&A. And then if by any chance, by miracle, there will be another few minutes for more questions, of course, you can always come back to me if you like, Emma.
Lovely. Thanks, Lee. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions coming in now, which is fantastic. So I'll start with Christine Bell. Christine says, at what stage of the writing did you find the confidence to tell your story and know that it was worth sharing?
I think for years I didn't have that confidence at all. I was writing essay really until 2016. And in that process, the essay kind of gave me a little bit of reassurance because it allowed me to universalize. And so even if I was writing an essay about digging out the composting loo and what that meant for me in terms of being someone who came from South Africa and was now doing this, it sent me off into talking about housework and then about domestic workers in Hong Kong. So it let me go much bigger than just, this is my story. And I think that was why I was so resistant to moving to memoir, because I really wanted to have that other, broader than me story going alongside my own. And really it was Nadine Davidoff who finally said to me, Hayley, this needs to go to memoir. And she had to help me get rid of all sorts of essayistic thinking that was, kept popping back into the next version of the book.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Jenny Khan. Jenny says, what shifted from feeling like you didn't belong and finding a place as an immigrant to a sense of belonging? What were the critical factors that contributed to this?
Obviously, I've lived in different places for significant periods of time, but I still will come back to that sense of being at home inside myself as the critical factor to have distinguished it. I lived here with Jen for years, and of course I felt, part of the community, and, I lived here, but there was always an ambivalence for me. The duality of my self and experience just didn't let me feel anchored and okay where I was. I always felt, it would be fraudulent to call myself a local or a farm person or anything like that. So I think it was when I went to Melbourne, I talked about my robust Melbourne self. And it was there that I, around other thinkers and writers and readers, that and very dear old and new friends, there I reclaimed who I am. And so when I came back here, it felt all right to be in the cattle yards with Jen and not do as well as she. It was okay not to be good at cattle work or not very good at digging fence holes or any of that sort of stuff. And same too on the fire line. So I think it is that self-acceptance and integration that is what made it home.
Molly, Galia and her dad Joe say, I was really struck by the quote at the start of the book about how we are as different from ourselves as we are from each other. I really get that sense from the book, and it rings so true for me. Does the act of wrestling your many selves into a narrative change how you see yourself? Does writing change you, or does it simply reflect you? Great question.
Oh, Molly, always fabulous question. I think one of the things I did want to say, what's been very odd about this experience of launching a book at this moment is to see the avid reader picture, which is hairy Hayley with all my lovely long locks. And then I see myself now as this person with this short, dykey haircut. And it's been quite weird. I've kept having to say to the lovely Pitch Projects team or to Holly or to Jen, which picture of myself should I use to send with this publication? Because I've had this really odd sense of, who am I, where am I? Because so much has changed since the book ended. And I think, it's been great in terms of distancing myself, but it's also almost reinforced that theme of how we're always still becoming and our lens keeps changing and we are all so multidimensional. So, I think we are as different from ourselves as we are from each other. And there are so many parts of us. I think Joan Didion's beautiful quote where she talks about how it's important to remain on nodding terms with one's former selves, otherwise they show up unannounced at 4 a.m. I think that's, another one of the crucial things to me is that, integrating that past and present. So somehow managing to find a way forward, knowing our multidimensionality. I'm not sure if I've answered all your questions, Molly.
I think that was a fantastic answer and a fantastic question as well. I have a question from Catherine Howell, followed quickly by Kath Fisher. They're a very similar question. So Catherine says, firstly, Hayley, it's great to see you, and your excitement and happiness is so wonderful to see. So many people out here are so proud of you and love you so much. My question is, what are you writing now? And Kath Fisher has also said, I'd like to ask Hayley about what she sees as her next project. Will she try fiction, go back to that novel in the drawer? Question mark.
I won't be going back to fiction. I was asked to write a short story last year for Lightning Flash, an outstanding queer short story competition publication. And it was fun to do it, but I was very aware of how much I was just writing a version of my story. I'm in a bit of a pickle, and I was, hoping to have a chat with Jane about this at some point, but I guess I'll just blurt it out here. I've got, I have probably the makings of a book about my stepmother's murder. I spent 3 months in South Africa in the courtroom, watching all of that unfold. So I have that sitting there in an enormous pile. I also have come through a year of quite extreme treatment for ovarian cancer. So, I'm really interested in what all of that has brought me to understanding and thinking about. and how, you know, we keep living with cancer, because I think many, many more of us do keep living with cancer kind of hovering over us and presenting uncertainty to us. And I think too, you know, as Lee mentioned, that precariousness of living in an environment which is uncertain too, which I think all of us in the world are in. So there are those sorts of themes and ideas that I've kind of been thinking about. When my mum died in 2018, and I'm deeply sad that she's not around to see this book, because she would have been really proud, I think. I kind of I packed up her library. Jen and I packed up her library and brought it back here last February. And my mother really, you know, my inheritance from her is her love of literature and of friendship. And I'd been sort of playing with some stuff around friendship and reading when I got diagnosed with cancer. So those are all my various themes and interests, and I'm not quite sure which way to go.
Thank you. Few more coming in. Jeff Glazer asks, what was the discipline you applied to write Untethered?
Thanks, Kaz. This is my lovely cousin, my one cousin, first cousin in Australia. I've always had discipline. It's just who I am. Most of my friends are amused by it. It's what I want to do. I want to write. I want to sit at my desk. It's my safe home and my safe place. So I guess the writing over these years, particularly on the farm, has just been, that's what you do. You go for a walk, you go to your desk, you work. You just sit it out and you keep trying. And I think I've struggled with probably sometimes doing too many drafts. But, you know, that's just all part of the process.
Sherry asks, I'd love to know the name of the artist of that painting on the wall, the blue one with the red-haired lady. Funnily enough, Sherry, we were all talking about this while we were, right before this conversation, while you were in the waiting room, about the lovely art. Everybody
that's the best question. This is by my friend Ev Jones. Ev is the sister to the woman who was my housemate for 8 years. And Ev created this. It's actually a mosaic, which you can't see, but it was one of her first works, and she's, you know, explored all sorts of other different mediums. So that's Ev's beautiful Once in a Blue Moon, which I love, and it's been on my wall for years. And the other one is Mandy Nolan. This is the book I refer to in, this is the painting I refer to in the book. She's a comedian in the Byron Shire area and all over the place, and is wonderful. And it's Virgin in a Strange Land, which I bought some years ago, thinking it was quite apt for me. Both in at that point I had moved to the farm yet, but it's just got more and more relevant.
Lovely, thank you. Judy Summers asks, has it been cathartic writing the book? And there is catharsis and real, in brackets, primal catharsis. Which have you experienced?
I'm always so interested in this question that's asked of memoirists, this, you know, was it cathartic, was it therapeutic? And I have to say, you know, at the same time that I've been writing, I've been often working with a therapist. And I'm deeply grateful to Claudia, who has helped me so much, particularly since Janae's murder. I don't know, writing has helped me make sense of things. If that's cathartic, then perhaps yes. Writing has helped me live. But I think there is no one single kind of watershed mechanism or process that one can follow to try and help oneself walk through this world. So yes, in ways, it's been immensely helpful. And it's been my friend. You know, I think it's one of the best friends any of us can have.
I have one more question here. I think that we've got a bit more time. If anybody has been sitting on a question that they have for Hayley, then please do send it through to me. But otherwise, this is the last one that we've got for now. It's from Susan Curry, and Susan says, I loved Untethered and the questions it raised. The one aspect of Hayley's life that I didn't understand was why she didn't join Jen in her activism, as that would unite them further. And the environment was such an important issue to address. So I know that you did address that a little bit earlier, but I'm wondering if you could elaborate on your decision not to do that for Susan.
I might just correct you a little bit. For some time, I was very involved with the movement. It was Jen's initiation that got me more and more involved. But as soon as I got a job for myself, and that was law, then, you know, I landed up writing police complaints and writing submissions and helping people and doing all that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, in the course of that, I came unhinged. I came unstuck. It's that thing of retreating to an old home, and law was my old home. And in the course of all that environmental activism on the North Coast, I landed up feeling like I had inappropriately stepped into a role that wasn't mine. And it shamed me, and I felt terrible about myself, and I felt like everybody in the movement judged me. And I haven't been able to write that story as its whole in this, well, it's not in this book, it's written, but it was too much for this narrative. So I haven't written that story in its fullness there. It's the story of Maggie, who lands up being charged and ultimately getting off on appeal. But that story really, I felt completely responsible and terrible that had happened for her. And I felt like everybody was judging me, that had happened. It wasn't the case, but that's where I went in my head. And so I pulled back and back and back. And at the same time, as Jen got more and more involved, I wanted to find something that was mine. I think the problem when you move into a world, to live with your partner in their world, is you can sometimes feel that you lose yourself. You're not sure who you are. And that's what was happening for me here. I needed something that was mine, and the gas movement started to feel to me like it was Jen's. So, and I do think all those things I mentioned about perhaps the shallowness of my roots and my mobility is part of that as well.
Lovely, thank you. Susan is the member of my book club who loved your book, as she said, and recommended it to us all. So thanks again, Susan, for that. Christine has a question. How have you reconciled the changes in yourself and your environment with other expectations, both those that you've left and those whose community you've come into, i.e. what freed you to live for yourself?
I think realizing that many of the expectations, realizing that expectations were part of my problem was helpful. You know, I think it's James Baldwin who talks about going somewhere, going away from America to Paris in order to, you know, get rid of some of those expectations of who he was meant to be. Everybody else, always same as Hilary Mantel, it's the same theme, everybody trying to write who you are. So I think exploring it on my own more, going to Melbourne, having the time here, yeah, I think I don't know what that, I don't understand enough what that process in me has been. I just know that it feels different now. But I must admit, you know, I'm happy back here on the farm, but part of that is because I feel connected again to the world. So, you know, my expectations of wanting to connect with other writers and readers and thinkers, they have in a way been fulfilled because I reaffirmed and asserted connections when I was away from here, and those have been sustained. And I also found some people here. I joined a pottery group, and I found some people who can actually talk my language. They talk about it through another modality, but we are actually talking about art and creativity and how to live when we're together.
Lovely, thank you. So that is all the questions that I've had so far. So I might, and we are very nearly out of time, so I might hand back to you, Lee, and to you, Hayley, as well, if you have any last comments that we'd like to make, or a final question, and then I will be unmuting everybody to say thank you to all of our speakers tonight. I've posted the link to purchase Hayley's wonderful novel, memoir, Untethered, in the chat box. I'll post it again now for you. But yes, otherwise, thank you for joining us very much. And I'll hand back to Lee and to Hayley now.
Well, I would love to ask the last question, if I may. Hayley, is that okay? Unless you would like to say something. No?
Go on.
Okay. I just think we kind of didn't touch enough on something that obviously is very important to you, and you raised it before, which your book in many ways is a love story. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of quickly ask you about what was it like for you to write about your beloved, and you've done it. I mean, I really, if I had a hat, I would have taken off it for you, because you've done it in such a honest and kind of warts and all way. So what was it like for you in terms of your ethics and decision making, writing about you and Jen with such candor?
It's completely bizarre to me that we've had to block Jen's face out. She doesn't have the video link because of the unstable connection here in the bush. So I'm finding all of that a little odd in this moment. It's been a really interesting process for us, and I kind of hope at some point, and Jen and I have had some very good conversations about this. I think, you know, what would happen is I would draft something, and then I would go in and over a drink in the evening, I'd read to Jen and we would have a conversation. And it certainly was, as, you know, there are some chapters which, you know, my little jealous self, when I wrote about that stuff, all of that was very difficult for both of us. And, you know, it led to lots of relationship conversation, which was quite fascinating. One of the things that's been interesting, and we've really, I think it's helped me understand this whole thing about writing oneself as well. You know, Jen sometimes said to me that it doesn't feel like her. You know, I think, and where I felt at one point, oh my God, did I misrepresent you? I so hope I haven't misrepresented you. I feel like this is my love letter to you as well. But where we sort of got to is that nobody can really know us from the outside. You know, how we are in ourselves is always going to be different from how we're perceived. And, you know, even here I am, you know, some people say I'm laying bare so much about myself, but I am. I'm trying to write the internal, because I think the internal is what we often don't communicate. And so, you know, I've done that. And of course, I can't write Jen's internal in the way that she might if she wrote. So it's been really interesting. And, you know, she's so generous and so incredibly wise and mature. And, you know, initially she said to me, I'm a character in your book, Hayley. And, you know, people will perceive Jen as sort of more ochre and more Oz, you know, sort of farmer Jen than, you know, she's got so many dimensions to her as well. And that's that same point. We are just all so multidimensional. So it's been an extraordinary experience. And she would say that she wouldn't, you know, she's really pleased. She gave me carte blanche. And look, she's read, you know, she's heard everything read. We've talked everything through. And I think she's read this manuscript about 5 times, poor bugger. But it's been, you know, it's been a really, I think it's been an enriching thing for us rather than anything else. And it certainly has been, you know, the ethics of, we can't talk about the ethics here, but certainly in terms of writing Jen, that's part of the ethics. And you don't want to misrepresent anybody, and you certainly want to come from a place of love or, you know, kindness, certainly never revenge when you're writing. So, you know, I think I was able to with that, with Jen. And also, don't assume, a reader can't assume that they know everything about the characters in a memoir, because we can't write it.
That's wonderful. Hayley, do you want to say anything else before we kind of finish? Because I can see Emma looking at us.
I'd love to thank you, Lee, for those marvelous questions. We can chat forever. We have to do it again one day. And Jane, I'd love to thank you yet again, and all of you for coming. I feel so completely loved and supported and, you know, embraced in all of this, and as if Untethered is creating community in its own way as a book. And something that we can, you know, it's a conversation is what I want to start, really. And I'm hoping that we can keep on having them. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Avid Reader.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Hayley. Hayley, I have one more request that's come in from Catherine Howell, and hopefully you'll be able to fulfill it. She's asked if Jen can come in onto your screen so that we can say that we can all meet her properly. So
hopefully she's got to come from the lounge. Where is she? I'm on the veranda. She's coming. Come on. Don't think you'll get away with it. Congratulations.
Thought you had. Lovely. So what I think I'll do now, as we wrap up, is I'm going to unmute everybody so we can give Hayley and Lee a round of applause for a fantastic discussion tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please consider coming along to another one of our events. And yep, congratulations so much, Hayley. This is a wonderful, wonderful work, and it is a fantastic event that we've had tonight. So you're all now coming off mute, so please join me in thanking our speakers.
Thank you.
And Hale.
Isn't it funny?
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely night.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Well done.
Well done, well done.
Hi.
Fantastic work, Hayley. Fantastic. Love you, Jen.
Well, love you both.
Our friend.
Very
Welcome, Katie.